Welcome to Italics, television for the Italian-American experience. I'm your host, Anthony Tamburri. This month, we're joined at the Calandra Institute by Alison Cornish, professor and chair of Italian Studies at NYU, and we attended the Charities of America celebration honoring the Calandra Institute's Director for Community and International Programs, Joan Migliori. Alison Cornish is professor and chair of Italian Studies at NYU and current president of the Dante Society of America. Author of two monographs, Reading Dante's Stars, Yale University Press 2000, and Vernacular Translation in Dante's Italy, Illiterate Literature, Cambridge University Press 2011, as well as the commentary on Stanley Lombardo's translation of Dante's Paradiso, she has written a number of essays on Dante, Petrarch, and Boccaccio, and the culture of translations in which they flourish. She has been a fellow at the University of Michigan Institute for the Humanities and at Harvard Center for Renaissance Studies at Vilitati. Her latest book, entitled Believing in Dante, is forthcoming from Cambridge University Press. Alison, welcome to Italics. It's wonderful to have you and for you to take time out of your day.
Thank you, Anthony. It's lovely to be here at the Calandra Institute.
Besides being one of the eminent scholars on Dante, both here and in Italy, you're also the president of the Dante Society of America. So give us an idea of what that is as compared to the Società Dante Alighieri, which is the old institution still alive and still very vibrant in Italy.
I believe the Società Dante Alighieri is about the Italian language and promoting it throughout the world primarily. And the Dante Society of America was started by a group of guys, among whom there was Longfellow, the poet, American poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who was working on his translation of the Divine Comedy, and so he would get his friends together to compare notes, and some of their wives and mothers were also involved. And it was in Cambridge, around Harvard University, and that's when they founded the Dante Society in, I believe it was 1885. I hope I don't have the date wrong. And it's older than the Società Dantesca Italiana, strangely enough. So the American enthusiasm for Dante goes back at least that far. The mission statement, you can find it at the Dante Society's website. The mission is to promote the reading of this great author. So it's really about the author Dante. Well, we have a journal, which is called Dante Studies.
Which is a very
preeminent journal.
Yes.
Peer-reviewed, double-blind, and so forth, which is edited by Justin Steinberg from the University of Chicago. Who's doing a really great job with that. And then we have a symposium once a year where we have a theme and we invite speakers and we promote the study of Dante. So, for example, one thing I did this year in the anniversary year, everybody wants to have a lectura dantis, which, as you know, is a kind of long commitment because there are 100 cantos of the Divine Comedy. So I thought, well, could we try to do that? Do a marathon reading. Lots of people are thinking about ways to honor this poem, and because we were in lockdown, I thought, well, maybe interviews with people about Dante would be the way to go. And what was really wonderful about it was that it was crowdsourced from the members of the Dante Society of America. And our members are not just professors. There are a lot of professors, but there's also graduate students, and there's also people who are not even academics, who just really love this poem. And so what's really great about the Canto per Canto conversations with Dante in our time is that it's showcasing all the people who are interested in Dante, including children and elderly people and clerics and people who have other jobs. And that was a project that I spearheaded because I wanted to get the membership involved.
And you did all 100.
And we did all 100. And we did it within the year, within one calendar year, from September 2020 to September 2021.
The canto begins immediately with a vision of pain and suffering.
They are enveloped in a thick, noxious, viscous smoke.
The sun, not at the horizon, but at the zenith.
Dante makes an invocation to the holy muses, O Sacrosante Vergini.
They see that he's broken and that he's got this chance simply because the universe is inviting him home.
He remains stuck in the subsisto moment.
The intellectual generosity of a true mentor does not place conditions on your learning. All they do is welcome you.
The thing that made it work also was that we let anybody talk about any canto in any order, so we didn't have to wait for number one to finish before number two.
Yeah.
But now they've been ordered in a YouTube library series in
Wonderful.
order. So you can consult them whenever you want to and just get inspired or get a little educated or get amused by them. And I think some of my colleagues say they've been using them in their teaching.
That sounds great. Professional academics and just sort of amateurs in the sense of the people who love to do, right?
The youngest person, I think, was 11.
So Dante wanted readers to read his book like they read the Bible. Was he presuming to be writing like God?
Yes, you've nailed the scandal on the head.
So let's talk about the impact of Dante today, right? And there are two things. One, the impact of Dante, and then the other thing we can chat about a little bit, and not in a qualitative way, only a quantitative, are the translations that have and continue to sprout, right? Because you yourself were involved in annotating a translation, if I'm not mistaken. Dante is, on the one hand, all over, but on the other hand, it seems he could be more all over.
Well, Dante is always new, always relevant, and that's not just because it's Dante, it's not just because he's Italian, it's because it's a great book. And so the concept of a great book has come under a kind of some attack, in recent times. And I always say, well, if you read older books, you're more likely to find the great ones because the less great ones have dropped off, So that's one kind of clue to it. So Dante is always new. And, on the subject of translation, translations always have to be redone. It's never done. And every time you read anything that's not, well, I would say anytime you read anything, you kind of have to put it in your own words and paraphrase it so that it makes sense to you. But certainly, obviously, with something that's in a foreign language and something that's in an old language and that comes from a cultural ambiance that seems unfamiliar. So yeah, when I teach Dante, it's always kind of, it's a revelation that it's comprehensible, that it seems to speak to people now in their current situation, that it's not something old or passé, but instead always new. Just today with my class, we were in the episode in Purgatory where Virgil gets to meet his greatest fan, it turns out, who's Statius, and all the surprise there of finding that there could be such a thing as a Roman poet who ends up being Christian, and then the Roman poet says, I'm your greatest fan, and then he says, yeah, I loved it when you said, and he quotes the passage, which is really a translation into Dante's Italian of the original Latin, and he gets it completely wrong, and he goes, and that saved my life, and you can just imagine the poet Virgil going, this is my biggest fan, and he completely missed the point, or maybe got the point. I mean, this is one of Dante's big lessons. What you get out of a book is what you need, and what the author intended is almost secondary to it. And of course, as academics and philologists, ultimately, we are always trying to figure out, well, in the context of Dante's time, what was he trying to mean? And we're always trying to sort of scientifically get at that. That's what the academics should do. And we benefit from the philologists who explain these things to us and get closer to what we think maybe Dante was going after. But on the other hand, there's the experience of reading where you could get a meaning which seems to be entirely contrary, but if it's what we would say in Dante language, salvific, which means it helps you, right? then it's good. You know?
This year, being in charge of an institute, having to deal with various programming and things of that sort. So I went back to look about Dante in English, right? And so I found that, and correct me, but I found that basically it's the end of the 18th, beginning of the 19th century, 1798, 1800, that we have a first sort of substantial translation of Dante, right? And through the 19th century, there are 80 to 90. I mention that only because when we think of the United States, then we think also of Italian immigration to the United States. And for me, it seems that Italian was always a cultural language up until about 1880, 1890. And when the immigrants started coming in, it sort of, it doesn't devolve, it's just that they're not speaking standard Italian, they're speaking dialects and stuff. And so there's this sort of uninformed, non-Italian collective that doesn't understand the difference.
One of the things that's said about Dante is that he writes in Italian. That's the first thing you have to parse, because of course when he was writing there was no Italian, there was only Florentine or dialects of different places. And then, of course, it's true that he sort of launched literary Italian, but literary Italian was also already kind of Tuscan already. I mean, the Tuscans are already reading and writing in the vernacular when Dante kind of hits the scene. And so what really makes Italians speak Dante's Italian, people always say, is actually the RAI, is actually the radio and television, right? It's really television. So you have immigration to this country before right? So they come without that common language, whereas now most Italians have two languages, right? The one they speak at home and then the one they learn from the television. So at the time that Longfellow is translating is the time, right, when the Italian, right, that's sort of 1880s. And so to what extent would he associate Dante with the immigrants, you know, in Boston? Probably not at all. But as I was saying before, there was also this kind of aversion to what Dante represented, which was also Catholicism, the kind of musty, authoritarian, oppressive structure of saints, purgatory, you know, which is completely gotten rid of in Protestantism and stuff. So there was a kind of having a lot of things they had to get over in terms of their natural aversion to Dante and to make Dante kind of American, or to appeal to an American sensibility.
Let's talk about translation in the sense that 200 years later, he's still being translated. You know, I always mention in the few comments that I'm asked to make, I always mention that. Here is in the 90s, our Nobel laureate, Robert Pinsky, translating the Inferno. You were there when I said that I was leafing through either the New York Review of Books or the London Review of Books, and bingo, there's an ad. I think it was either the Inferno or the Purgatorio of Mary Jo Bang, who is also another one of our prominent American poets, right? And here they are translating Dante.
The one that I looked at closely to really watch how a translator was working was the Stanley Lombardo Paradiso that I not only wrote the commentary, but I also reported on the translation just to check it for accuracy. And you know, sometimes I would say, no, that's not what that means. And sometimes I would say, whoa, that was amazing that you managed to pull that off. But yeah, it's fiendishly difficult. Dante himself was interested, I think, in translation. Translations are something that are going on in his day because, in fact, people start wanting to consume literature, and yet they don't really have Latin, and so there's this kind of boom in translation. It's also facilitated by the fact that you now have paper, so it's just a cheaper thing that people can have access to. And so you have translations of Latin works into prose, usually. Even poems were translated into prose. So he's kind of in a translation movement, actually. And Cristoforo Landino, the Renaissance humanist, said that the whole Divine Comedy was just a translation of the Aeneid, which is not quite the whole thing, but that idea that was the sort of impetus to it, was to bring into his own language what he had loved in another language.
When I was in graduate school in the 70s, it was Singleton was the name that everyone spoke about in his 6 volumes that were published and republished. And then the other name that comes to mind always for me, again, I'm to all of our friends who are under a certain age, if you're not mentioned, it's because I'm doing it on purpose, is John Freccero. And I mention that only because way back when I remember he gave a keynote on Dante, and he went for 45 minutes without notes and without an and without an ah, and it was a perfect, and I remember saying, I want to be able to do that someday. These are the 2 sort of classic names that come to mind for me for the U.S.
So Singleton was born in Oklahoma, I think. I mean, he had no Italian anything. He learned Italian sort of by accident. I mean, one story I heard was that his roommate was getting up at 8, and so he did too, or something extremely random like that. And he learned Italian. Of course, he learned beautiful Italian. I was just talking about Singleton today because in that very episode where Dante stages this unbelievable misreading by the later Roman poet of Virgil. Here's this brilliant man who knew more than anybody at the time, and he sees that in his text Dante has mistranslated the Aeneid, and he tries to save Dante from embarrassment. Of course, this is something that probably wouldn't arise if you're reading it in Italian, right? You wouldn't, but the translator has this obligation and this sort of panic. You can imagine it's like, oh, it looks terrible that he didn't understand the Italian. Of course, I think we now all agree that it's a kind of staged misunderstanding that Dante was doing. But Singleton translates in the English from the Aeneid, so it no longer makes any sense because just in order to save him. And so that's an example of somebody, you know, we would call it a blindness, right? When you can only see blindnesses of other people when you're at a distance, either a temporal distance or a cultural distance or something to see it. And so that's Singleton, and he translated in prose. He did a commentary. He got tired by the time he got to the Paradiso, and he ended up copying most of it from a predecessor named Grandgent. So that's a plug for my Paradiso. I only did the Paradiso, so I wasn't exhausted by the time I got there. So that's one reason why I recommend it. So John Frachero was my teacher as well. He's a New Yorker, right? He's a New York Italian. And I was just always kind of, because I'm not Italian, I have to confess. I'm not Italian either. I'm more like Singleton, Midwestern roots. And so when John Frachero would talk about his father's barber shop next to Washington Square, and his father always used to say, you don't know what it's like to hate your job every day of the week. They moved up in life, they moved to Queens. And so for John Frachero, his last job was basically my job. He came back to NYU, and when the Casa Italiana was founded by the Baronessa Zeri di Marimo, and he lived across the street in NYU housing, one of the grand buildings on the square across from his father's barbershop.
Oh, how wonderful.
So right, this thing of before that it was the great book versus the Italian immigrant, right? And then those things really kind of came together in somebody like John Frachero.
I mentioned those two. I knew the Hopkins connection, whatever, but I mentioned those two because they are two canonical names, right? We can say.
Maybe it was Montale who said that Charles Singleton was l'americano che ci insegnò Dante, so that the Italians could learn about Dante from this American. And many people have said the same thing about John Frachero, that he made something new to them, to have it reflected back to them. The Italian-American, right, those hyphenated things are so important because in the act of translating or in the act of looking something that's very distant from us, again, either in time or in place, that we see new things and make it new for us.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that some Italians said Singleton and Frachero, that they taught us something, because I think there sometimes is a bit of possessiveness on the establishment. Now, I'm not talking about all Italians, whatever, but there's that sort of, what do you want to call it, dominant cultural establishment, et cetera.
The Ivory
Tower. It's a little bit possessive.
The Ivory Tower, too. The great fan of Frachero's work was Roberto Benigni. He really popularized the idea that the great American Dante scholar was American.
Di qua, di là, di giù, di su li mena, nulla speranza li conforta mai, non che di posa ma di minor pena. E come i gru van cantando l'orlai, facendo in aere di sé lunga riga, così vidi venir traendo guai, ombre portate dalla detta briga, perch'io dissi maestro, chi son quelle genti che l'aura nera si castiga?
Talk to us a little bit about teaching Dante. So you're teaching this class, you're doing it in English to majors, minors, graduates, or is it
everybody?
Open?
It's open to everybody.
Okay.
So I get a lot of, at NYU you get a lot of Tisch students, which means people in the performing arts, and also artistic people. I have a student making a painting. He already did the Inferno and now he's doing the Purgatorio, and evidently his work is on exhibit on First Avenue, so you can go buy it if you'd like to. So they respond creatively to Dante, which is pretty cool. But also the scientific types really like Dante. I mean, one of the things is, why is Dante so loved by Americans now? As, again, I was saying before, he wasn't in the beginning. And it's like this clarity, this mathematical harmony and proportion, and he's worked it all out, and it's a whole world. The way a video game is a whole world where everything sort of makes sense according to its logic. So scientific types like it, the English majors like it. It has a lot of appeal to a lot of different people. And then I also teach the graduate students.
and that you do in Italian.
And that definitely the
Yeah,
expectation
or
is
at least
that
the text is,
people,
yeah.
but I don't really like to shut anybody out, and so
Yeah.
I often get English MA students a
Mm-hmm.
lot. They sort of see it as something that they might want to teach maybe or
Yeah.
something. But about the
That's-
translations, I always say to people, get a facing page translation. You always want to have the Italian on one side because it's a reason to learn Italian. It's a reason to learn even just one Italian word, but there's so much in Italian that is comprehensible to an Anglophone speaker, so you can have access even just to individual words to get a lot of the resonance of it.
Now, the translation you annotated, Stanley Lombardo, you said, did he only do the?
No, he did all of them.
He did all of them?
Yeah, I just did the Paradiso.
So it's got to be a little bit daunting. I mean, obviously you've been around, so you've been teaching this for a long time. But when you first approach to do anyone in translation, it's got to be daunting because, especially with Dante, there's a translation like by everybody.
Yeah, I've never attempted the whole thing. It's very daunting, but people want to do it because they find it rewarding, and people want to buy them because they always want this poem to speak to them in the most up-to-date way, and so there's a need for them. Absolutely, there's a need for them. Italians will say to me, "Oh, Dante himself is daunting." They don't even want to. I mean, they'll read him, but it's also like they have to read him in school. But to actually engage with him and make it their subject of study, they're daunted by it.
Yeah.
How could you say anything new about it? So in a sense, it's kind of the same problem. Everyone's read this before, and instead the lesson of Dante is that everybody is going to have a new reading.
Right.
And every time I read it, particularly when I read it in the company of other people, I see different things that I didn't see before. And so I would just say, yeah, again, maybe the American reception of Dante teaches us that, in fact, even Italians can go back and read Dante and make it theirs, and not just something inherited and imposed.
And we should also say that Dante was more than a poet, right? I mean, he was a political scientist. He was a philosopher of sorts.
He was a political actor.
He was a political activist, right? He was, quote unquote, theoretician of language, the De Vulgare Eloquentia, for example. And I will say, heretically, he was maybe one of our first prose writers, right? La Vita Nuova.
Absolutely.
I mean, I remember a friend of mine many years ago sort of said, half tongue-in-cheek, I think, that perhaps when we think of the romanzo, the novel, everyone goes back, of course, to Manzoni, that maybe we need to go back to La Vita Nuova, and everybody, of course, boo, no, you can't say that, whatever. But really, when you think about it, he was one of our first prose writers as well. Right?
Well, when we say poetry, we have this image of the poet, standing up at, drinking sherry and, declaiming his poem. I'm always trying to translate just the concept of what Dante meant by what is a poet. Why is Virgil a great poet with a capital P? Yeah. Well, he's somebody that knows a lot, right? So it's not just, I express my feelings beautifully and you can ooh and ah at it. It's like you have studied everything, and that's what Dante did. He studied everything he could get his hands on, and then you communicate the truth not just only as you see it and in your language, but in a way that's attractive. That's the poet. So it's not just the person writing the treatise and being as clear and precise as he possibly can, but engaging you and, of course, making a story out of it, making a journey out of it, making these characters come to life that you're upset about or that you're attracted to. And that's what the poet does. So it's about knowing a lot, being able to communicate it, and being able to make you want to know. It's the desire part that's the guide. So I'm always trying to search for equivalents in our own society. I mean, the pundits, right?
Yeah.
Here we are, right? Who explain stuff to us. The artists, right? Who rap about things and make us want to listen to things. People who engage with what could be known from the past or what's going on in the present, communicate it and make us want to listen. That's what a poet is.
And we should say that for a while in Italian, up through maybe the early parts of the 20th century, poet was also synonymous with writer.
It's the best writer.
Right,
the best kind of, it's the most skilled writer. And also, it seems like it's just, you and me, we like books and we're literary people and stuff. But if you think that writing was the only technology to preserve what people said who were not present. Just think about that for a moment, and how we have so many other ways, like the Canto per Canto podcast or the Italics. We have all of these other television, so forth, not to mention social media, that we have these other ways besides writing. So that word writing has to really cover now a whole lot of other things. It's not just people who like books. It's like all communication that can be transmitted over centuries, not just in person, you and me, across the table.
Yeah. And your future work on Dante, is there anything we need to look out for?
Yes,
Are you?
I have a book of essays coming out from Cambridge University Press. It's going to be called Believing in Dante. What I've been thinking a lot in this present moment is our lack of social trust and belief in anything common, and that Dante really speaks to me on those terms right now, and the way I see that he's doing that is what I wrote about in this, I hope, very readable book called Believing in Dante.
Good. Well, listen, I want to thank you for taking time out of your day.
Thank you for
ran
inviting
up
me.
here from right after your class, and we appreciate that. And
Glad to be here.
We'll be talking soon.
All right. Thank
Good.
you, Anthony.
Thank you. The Calandra Institute's Director for Community and International Programs, Joan Miglioti, was given the Christopher Columbus Award by the Italian Charities of America on October 24th at their annual dinner dance. She was recognized for her years of service, coordinating study abroad programs, as well as her tireless efforts on behalf of the Italian Heritage and Culture Committee, among many other achievements.
It's amazing that you're honoring me for my love for Italian language and culture. Something that I've been doing all my life. I started as a young child, and I grew up in an Irish and German neighborhood, and I knew I spoke Italian, and I went to Italy, and I used to feel so sorry for these kids that were not Italian. Of course, all of this I have to thank my mother and father. They believed in, of course, family values, and they made sure their daughters learned Italian as the first language. So we could speak to our grandparents and relatives here in Staten Island, but also on our frequent trips to Italy. Since I was lucky enough to go to Italy almost every summer. They also made us take trips during our vacations to visit other cities in Italy, to learn about the culture and the history of Italy. Of course, we didn't want to go as young kids. We wanted to stay at my grandmother's summer home and play with our cousins. But they made us go on these trips. But as I got older, I realized the gift they gave us to learn firsthand about Italian culture. I guess I can say I was lucky. Historically, many Italian Americans worked so hard to help their children do well in the United States that they didn't teach them Italian. So they wanted their children to become great US citizens. Years ago, they didn't know the benefit of learning Italian, or second language, and it's actually a richness. And that showing your traditions proudly not only gives you a sense of pride, but enriches the community around you. Finally, my job has not been a job, but a passion. Thank you.
Thanks for watching this episode of Italics. I'm Anthony Tamburri. Arrivederci alla prossima puntata.